I've already gotten the 5-minute signal, and that was probably 6 minutes ago. A few points that I will not cover in my remaining -1 minute. The idea that so-called information goods are really not fundamentally new. They're economic goods. They have prices. They trade in markets just like any other economic good. So-called network externalities are, again, they get sort of overplayed in the literature. People claim that whenever there are these so-called network externalities, where the value of using a particular technology depends on the number of others also using it, that this leads to a kind of market failure, where arbitrary technologies end up dominating, like Facebook, for example, even when other competing technologies are really better. Some excellent work by 2 economists named Stan Liebowitz and Stephen Margolis have shown both theoretically and empirically that the markets can handle so-called network externalities very well, and that markets actually do a pretty good job of selecting the right technologies, even in the face of so-called path dependence. So to conclude, by skipping one more slide, the internet has, of course, had a huge impact on education, on culture, on the economy, on society at large. There are many interesting and unusual characteristics of this sector, which imply maybe different ways of doing business. First mover advantages are particularly strong. Sometimes companies will find it profitable to give some things away, right? Like Skype. Anybody can download and install Skype for free. Does that mean that the makers of Skype, a Danish company, that they're altruists, that they're not entrepreneurs interested in making money? No, of course not. But they have other ways of making money by charging for complementary products and services, such as technical support, calling to phones, certain kinds of premium features. So companies often give some things away for free to increase the number of users, what they call installed base, so that they can therefore make more money charging for other services to this installed base. Information goods and network effects are important, but not really all that new. And the basic lesson that I want you to take away from this is that the basic laws of economics that you can read from Karl Menger or Ludwig von Mises or Murray Rothbard, they're still good. Okay, Mises didn't write about the internet, it's true, but the principles of understanding human interaction, of understanding market competition, pricing, buying and selling, and so on, that one finds in works like Human Action, are just as important and valuable today as they were in the so-called old economy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bom, vamos ao debate então, a conversa, né? Alguém gostaria de começar? A gente, por favor.
Bom dia, meu nome é Caio. Só uma curiosidade, em um dos slides você mencionou a falácia do Nirvana, Nirvana Fallacy. Você poderia falar mais sobre o que seria isso? Fiquei curioso.
Like to know a little bit about Nirvana fancy that you mentioned previously.
Yes. So what they call the Nirvana fallacy, the economist Harold Demsetz is the one who coined the term, is the idea of looking at kind of imagining a perfect situation, a paradise, comparing a real-world outcome to that paradise, finding, not surprisingly, that it isn't as good, and concluding, therefore, that the market failed. So, for example, in the history of technology, many critics will say, well, what's a good example? So, let's say there's Facebook and MySpace, 2 competing social network platforms, or at least they were competing until recently, and some critics journalists, engineers will say, well, Facebook sort of ended up dominating, but the other one, MySpace, was really better. It was a better technology, but because Facebook had better advertising, or because Facebook had a little bit of a head start, that it ended up kind of, there was a snowball effect, like a snowball rolling down the hill, and all of a sudden it took over and it dominated. And gee, wouldn't it have been better if the other technology had won out? Most people here are too young to remember one of the classic examples is with videotapes. So 20 years ago or more, there were two different formats for video cassette tapes. So-called VHS, the one that became the dominant technology, and another one called Betamax, made by Sony. VHS beat Sony in the marketplace, but many critics of the market have said Betamax was really better. Just like this literature, they often use the term QWERTY. So that, the typewriter keyboard, in English it's QWERTY. I don't know how it is in Brazil. So the layout of the typewriter keyboard, it is said, is inefficient. It would really have been better if the market had adopted a different layout. We could all type faster and make fewer mistakes. But QWERTY won out, and now we're stuck with QWERTY. It's too hard to change. Once a particular technology has become the standard, it's very difficult to break out of it. What the literature has shown is that, sometimes we look back in history and we say, gee, wouldn't it have been nice if things had happened differently from the way they did? And that might make for interesting nostalgia, but that isn't a policy-relevant issue unless it can be shown that an alternative political mechanism, i.e. the state chooses the standard, would have worked better. So what critics like Paul David, the historian Paul David, have in mind is that the government should choose the standards. The government should say, well, which is better, Facebook or MySpace? It's this one, and you should use it. Betamax is really better than VHS. Blu-ray is not the best. It's this other one, HD DVD is how they marketed it in North America. Well, look, would we expect state planners to make better choices of what technology will in the future turn out to be the right one? To believe that the state could do this, to believe that government planners could do better than the market, is to commit the so-called nirvana fallacy.